There was a night in 1978 when Kenny Rogers finished singing a song and the room went completely silent. Not the silence of an audience that is unmoved, something else. A silence that Kenny had never heard in 30 years of performing, that he didn't have a name for, that lasted exactly 5 seconds and changed everything that came after. He has talked about many nights in his career. He has never fully explained that one. Kenny Rogers had been performing since he was a teenager in Houston, Texas, since the days when performing meant playing in the kinds of venues that exist at the beginning of every music career, the small rooms and the unglamorous stages where the audience is small enough that you can see every individual face and read every individual expression and know with uncomfortable precision exactly how what you are doing is landing. He had played those rooms. He had moved through them into larger rooms, and then into the specific career that the New Christy Minstrels and then the First Edition had produced, a career that had given him recognition and commercial success and a specific place in the popular music landscape of the late 1960s and early 1970s. And then the First Edition had ended. The group that had been his professional home for nearly a decade had dissolved in the way that groups dissolve, not dramatically, not with a single decisive moment, but gradually, through the accumulation of tensions and diverging ambitions and the specific wear that years of being in close professional and personal proximity to the same people produces. He had found himself in the mid-1970s in the specific position of someone starting over. Not from the absolute beginning, not without the experience and the reputation that the previous decade had produced, but without the structure that the group had provided. Starting over as a solo artist, starting over in country music, a genre that was not where he had come from and that required him to find a new relationship with his own voice and his own instincts. The years between the end of the First Edition and the night in question had been years of work, of recording and performing and building with the patient determination of someone who has learned that careers are constructed rather than discovered, that the path from where you are to where you want to be runs through an enormous amount of work that nobody sees and nobody acknowledges, and that produces, if you keep doing it long enough, the conditions for something to happen. He had kept doing it. He had released albums that performed respectably without performing spectacularly. He had toured. He had developed the specific quality of a live performer who has been performing long enough to know every room from the inside, to understand what a particular size of space requires, what a particular kind of audience responds to, what the difference feels like between a night when something is working and a night when something is almost working but hasn't quite arrived yet. The song had come to him through the specific channels by which songs come to performers who are not their own songwriters, through the industry infrastructure of writers and publishers and the various people whose professional function is to connect material with the artists who can most effectively deliver it. Don Schlitz had written it, a young songwriter who had not yet established himself as a significant figure in the Nashville writing community, whose name meant nothing to the industry that would eventually know it well. The song was called The Gambler. It was a narrative, a story told in the first person, set on a late-night train, about an encounter between the narrator and an old card player who offers, in exchange for a drink, the philosophy that has organized his life. Know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, know when to run. Kenny had heard the song and had heard inside it something that his experience of 30 years of performance told him was real, the specific quality of material that has been written from the inside of something rather than the outside, that carries in its construction the evidence of genuine understanding rather than skillful approximation. The old gambler on the train was not a character that Don Schlitz had invented as a literary exercise. He was someone Schlitz understood, had observed or imagined or inhabited long enough to be able to render with the specific precision that makes fictional characters feel like people you have actually met.
And the philosophy he carried, the philosophy of knowing when to hold and when to fold, of reading the situation rather than following the rule, of understanding that the measure of success is not what you win, but how you manage what you have, was the philosophy of a life lived with genuine wisdom rather than the philosophy of a greeting card. His label was not immediately convinced. This was not unusual. The distance between what an artist hears in a piece of material and what the industry apparatus hears in the same material is one of the most reliable features of the music business, a gap that has produced both the rejection of songs that went on to define careers and the enthusiastic release of songs that disappeared without trace. The label heard a long narrative song about an old man on a train offering life advice. They were not certain this was what the market wanted. Kenny was certain of something, though he could not have articulated precisely what he was certain of. He recorded the song. The night in question happened before the recording was released, in the specific period between the completion of the record and its availability to the public, when the artist knows what they have made and the world does not yet know it exists. He had added the song to his live set. This was the standard procedure, the incorporation of new material into the performance, the testing of it in front of real audiences before the recording made the test official and permanent. He had performed the new song on several occasions before the night that would become the night he remembered. It had gone well enough, had received the response that new material typically receives from audiences who are not yet familiar with it, a warm but not extraordinary reception.
The venue that night held several hundred people, not a small room, but not a large one, the middle scale of a touring career at the stage his was at, the rooms that are large enough to generate real energy and small enough to maintain the specific intimacy that makes certain kinds of music work. The audience was the audience of country music in the late 1970s, working people, people who had come from places and carried the specific experiences of those places with them into the room, people for whom the music was not a cultural accessory, but something more fundamental than that, something that said things about their lives that the other available languages of their world had not found adequate ways to say. He performed his set. He came to the new song. He introduced it briefly, not with the elaborate setup that certain songs eventually receive when they have become famous enough to require a ceremony of introduction, but with the simple statement that he was going to perform something new, something he believed in, something he hoped they would receive in the spirit in which it was being offered. He began to sing. The song unfolded in the way that narrative songs unfold, sequentially, each verse advancing the story, each chorus returning to the philosophy that the story was building toward. The train, the old man, the offer, the exchange, the wisdom delivered in the language of cards and of gambling and of the specific knowledge that comes from a life spent understanding odds. On a warm summer's evening, on a train bound for nowhere. The opening line placed you immediately in the scene, not in a general location, but in a specific one, specific enough that you could feel the heat and the movement and the darkness of a train at night traveling through a landscape that the song did not need to describe because the words warm summer's evening and train bound for nowhere had already told you everything you needed to feel the place. He sang through the verses. He watched the audience the way he always watched audiences, with the peripheral attention of a performer who is fully inside the delivery of the material and simultaneously monitoring the room, reading the response, adjusting the energy of the performance to what the room is giving back. What the room was giving back was not the usual response to new material. The usual response to new material has a quality of polite attention. The audience is present, is listening, is willing to receive what is being offered, but has not yet been reached in the specific place where reached means something more than received. What the room was giving back was different. The people were very still. The conversations that continue at the edges of a live performance, the quiet exchanges between the people sitting together, the movement of drinks and the minor logistics of a room full of people had stopped. The room was not merely listening, the room was still. He finished the last verse. The old gambler made his final disclosure that the secret to surviving is knowing what to keep and what to let go, knowing that every hand is a gift and every game has an end, and the best you can do is play what you are dealt with everything you have and walk away when the walking is right. He finished. He held the last note the way you hold a note when you feel the room holding with you. He let it go. 5 seconds of silence. Kenny stood at the microphone. He looked out at the room. The room looked back. He thought, I have made an error. He thought, the song is too long, too narrative, too different from what they came to hear. He thought all of these things in the specific compressed way that thoughts arrive in the 5 seconds of silence that follow a performance that you cannot immediately read, in the rapid assessment of someone who has been performing long enough to know that silence after a song means one of two things, and that the difference between the two silences is everything. In the front row, an old man stood up. He did not clap. He simply stood, with the specific deliberateness of someone who has decided that standing is what the moment requires, that sitting is no longer the appropriate relationship to what he has just heard. He stood and he looked at the stage and he did not make a sound. Kenny saw him rise. Kenny looked at him. The two of them, the man on the stage who had just sung the song and the man in the front row who had just heard it, looked at each other across the specific distance of a performance space and understood something simultaneously that neither of them could have put into words, but that both of them felt with complete certainty. Then the woman beside the old man stood up. Then a young man 3 rows back. Then the people around him. Then the room, all of it, all several hundred people rising without a word of coordination, standing in the specific silence that the song had produced, and that the old man in the front row had been the first to honor with his body rather than his hands. The applause came after the standing, arrived as the natural consequence of people who have stood up and then discovered that standing is not sufficient, that what they are feeling requires more than a vertical posture, that the hands need to join the tribute that the body has already begun. Kenny Rogers walked off the stage that night and sat alone in the backstage area for a long time. He held in his mind the image of the old man rising, the specific quality of that rise, the unhurried deliberateness of someone who has decided that standing is not a performance but a necessity, that the song has required it. He thought about what the song had done that his other songs, however successful, had not done in quite that way. What the 5 seconds of silence meant, and what the rising meant, and what it told him about the difference between music that people enjoy and music that people recognize. The Gambler was released in November of 1978. It reached #1 on the Billboard country charts and stayed there. It won the Grammy Award for Best Male Country Vocal Performance. It became the defining song of Kenny Rogers' career. The song that, when people thought of his name, arrived first in the mind, before Lady and before Islands in the Stream and before any of the other songs that the decades of his career produced. It became part of the language, the specific shorthand of a philosophy that people quoted and applied and taught to their children and returned to in the specific moments of their lives when they needed to understand what to hold and what to fold. Kenny Rogers performed The Gambler for 40 years after that night. He performed it in arenas and stadiums and televised specials and the 2017 farewell concert that gathered everyone who had been part of his story onto one stage for one final night. He performed it 40,000 times, give or take, in every possible version of the song and every possible version of himself.
from the young man who had sung it for several hundred people in 1978 to the old man who sang it in Nashville in 2017 with the voice that 40 years of living inside the song had given him. He has said in various ways across the years that the gambler chose him rather than the other way around, that he did not fully understand what he had until the night it was performed live and the room went silent and an old man stood up without clapping, that the 5 seconds between the end of the song and the beginning of the standing were the 5 most important seconds of his career, the 5 seconds in which he learned the difference between a song and a song that is bigger than the person singing it. Know when to hold them, know when to fold them. The old gambler on the train offered the advice to a stranger on a night bound for nowhere. The stranger carried it forward, and somewhere along the way, a room of several hundred people went silent for 5 seconds, and an old man stood up without clapping, and a performer understood, for the first time, in the specific and irreversible way that understanding arrives when you have been waiting for it without knowing you were waiting, what he had been given and what it was going to ask of him for the rest of his life. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that the things we make are sometimes bigger than we are, that the song outgrows the singer, that the book outgrows the writer, that the work takes on a life that its creator did not plan and cannot control, and can only watch with the specific combination of pride and humility that belongs to people who have been the vessel for something that passed through them on its way to somewhere larger. Leave a comment below. What does the gambler mean to you? And don't forget to ring the notification bell for more stories about the nights that changed everything. The 5 seconds of silence, and the old man who stood up, and the songs that were always going to be bigger than the person who sang them.